Hello, we're back talking about good old Free to Be. And it's a wonderful little book, isn't it? And today's lesson on the third commandment, I think, is really good. The book starts talking about an important concept, and that is words or communication. You think about how much and how often, if you will, we use words during the day, being able to speak to our friends, being able to listen to what our teachers or our family members or whoever tell us is so important, right? I mean, the ability to listen is probably more important than the ability to speak words. And that really leads well into what this commandment, remember the Sabbath day, is all about. Sabbath means rest. It means taking it easy. It means being silent. It means listening. Rest, the Sabbath day. And what the book says, and Martin Luther says, is that when we take our Sabbath, when we take our rest day, that it's so important that we open our ears to listen to God's word. That is what the Sabbath day is all about. Resting to listen to what God has to tell us. Because when we don't listen to God, when we close our ears to God's word, then suddenly we start making God into our own image. We start making our own way of making God. But when we listen to God's word, then suddenly we listen to what the Creator of all things has planned for our lives. Now, this is a great time to begin to discuss or begin to teach you about what worship is, especially in the Lutheran Church. Worship for Lutherans is mainly hearing God's word preached to us as well as experienced in the sacraments, baptism, and communion. And again, we'll talk more about this later. Whenever we have worship in the Lutheran Church, we use a thing called liturgy. Liturgy means the work of the people. That when we worship on Sunday, we're not coming here in order to be entertained. We're not coming here to just sit idly by, but again, participate as a community in hearing the word and praising and thanking God. In our worship service, we use what's called an ancient pattern for worship, a way in which Christians have been listening to the word for centuries. The first thing we do when we gather is we sing. We come together. We gather as a community. That's the first thing we do. Often in churches you'll see people carrying or processing in with a cross as a way of saying that we've been out in the world all week, living our lives, doing God's work, and then on Sunday morning we all follow that cross back into our gathering, and we sing music. We also often will say, we'll also do our confession and forgiveness as a way of remembering our baptism and remembering that we are gathered together as a forgiven people. The second part of our worship service is listening to the word read from the ancient words of the Old Testament to the ancient words of the New Testament. All about listening to what God speaks to us in the Bible. And then we have a sermon. A sermon is a way in which we take what is written in the Bible and build a bridge for that word to today. It is the bridge that spans 2,000 years, making what is written here applicable to our own lives. Then after the word, we have the meal. What happens in Holy Communion on the altar? Where on that altar we gather around the Lord's table to share in this wonderful experience of Jesus' meal with us. And again, we'll go over more of that when we talk about communion. And then finally, at the end of the worship, we do the sending, in which we are sent out into the world to do God's work. Lutheran worship is all about gathering, listening, experiencing, and going forth to serve the world. It's also a time to indeed rest and to listen to what God has to say. Which brings us back again to your baptism. Baptism is when God first began to speak to you. When God spoke to you and said to you in an individual way that you are my child, you are forgiven, you are part of my kingdom. I will always speak a word to you. Remember your baptism. Remember the word. Again, going to church is not just going through the motions. It's taking time to listen to what God has to say to us. Martin Luther once said that the church is God's mouth house. It is when God turns on the speaker so that we can hear and listen what God's will is for us and to experience God's grace. So open up your ears. Make worship, listening to God, a part of your life.